G here, Gideon's Flight. Hey guys, just wanted to continue on a conversation that I was having with you on yesterday. And that conversation was in regards to the second, annual address of former President Abraham Lincoln. And I shared some thoughts inside of that video around the fact of what division could cause in a divided country. What are some of the dangers when you allow racial hatred and animosity, civil discontentment, politically influenced behaviors and action like the Civil War and its causes, what the overall result can be. Well, today I want to talk to you about something that you may know a little bit about, then again, maybe you don't. The reason I say you may know a little bit about it because there was a movie about this particular subject matter. Cameron Diaz was a main actress in the movie. Leonardo DiCaprio was also a main actor in the movie, and also Daniel Day-Lewis. I think Daniel Day-Lewis may have won an Oscar for the movie. And the name of the movie was The Gangs of New York. And this movie was about Manhattan, New York, to be exact, to be specific. Now, back in the 1840s, 1850s, Manhattan, New York was a very diversified, mixed area with a lot of free, Aboriginal Americans. You would have called, or history would call them so-called free blacks. But there were always also Irish there. There were also some Italians there, and a few other racial groups there. But if you remember the movie, the movie pretty much talks about the wars between the immigrants. And in this instance, the immigrants, how interesting, right? And the immigrants were really the Italians fighting against the Irish because they were the immigrants in the 1850s. How interesting is that? So you guys, if you fall in one of those ethnic groups, you were the immigrants in this country a little bit over 150 years ago. So, that says a little bit, right? But I digress. But the main subject I wanted to bring up, again, when you start looking at that movie, a part of that movie that was overlooked were the race riots that happened inside of that movie. And it was called the New York City Draft Riots. And what happened was that when Abraham Lincoln passed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, what happened with that is that up north they started pushing the draft. And what it was is that they started drafting, Americans who could not pay $300 to avoid the draft were eligible for the draft. Men between the ages of, I think, 18 and maybe 40 years old. And so the Irish, in particular, I'm sure there were some Italians, but the race riot was primarily driven by the Irish, in particular, were upset that they had to go and fight in the Civil War on behalf of so-called blacks or, colored people, Negroes. So their reaction inside of the city of Manhattan was this. I'm going to read it to you. Says the New York City Draft Riots, July 13 through 16, 1863. It says, known at the time as Draft Week, were violent disturbances in Lower Manhattan, widely regarded as the culmination of working class discontent with new laws passed by Congress that year to draft men to fight in the ongoing American Civil War. The riots remain the largest. Get that, the largest, not Tulsa and some of these Rosewood. The riot remains the largest civil and racially charged insurrection in American history besides the Civil War itself. That's how big this was, this riot. U.S. President Abraham Lincoln diverted several regiments of military and volunteer troops after the Battle of Gettysburg to control the city. The rioters were overwhelmingly working class, mostly Irish or Irish descendants who feared free black people competing for work and resented that wealthier men who could afford to pay $300 compensation fee to hire a substitute were spared from the draft. Initially intended to express anger at the draft, the protest turned into a race riot with white rioters, predominantly Irish immigrants, attacking black people throughout the city. The official death toll was listed at either 119 to 120 individuals. Conditions in the city were such that Major General John E. Wool, commander of the Department of the East, said on July 16th that martial law ought to be proclaimed, were spared from the draft. Initially expressed anger at the draft, the protesters turned to a race riot. I lost my place. Okay? Where white rioters, predominantly Irish immigrants, attacking black people throughout the city. Okay, I told you what the death toll was. And it says that Major General John E. Wool said that martial law ought to be proclaimed, but I have not the sufficient force to enforce it. So not only were they attacking and killing blacks, Irish immigrants, they could not even stop them. The military did not have the manpower to stop the killing. The military did not reach the city until the second day of the rioting, by which time mobs had ransacked and destroyed numerous public buildings, 2 Protestant churches, the homes of various abolitionists or sympathizers, many black homes, and the colored orphanage asylum at 44th Street and 5th Avenue. If you remember the movie Gangs of New York, that's in that movie, which burned to the ground. The area's demographics changed as a result of the riot. Many black residents left Manhattan permanently, with many moving to Brooklyn. By 1865, the population fell below 11,000 for the first time since the 1820s. Now you say, well, Deo Squanto, why are you sharing this? I'm sharing this because when we start talking about American history, when we start talking about making America great again, well, we have to look at what great again looked like. In other words, we got to deal with the again aspects of making America great again. Because when I look at America, historically speaking, America may have been great for others. In this instance, I guess for the Irish immigrants, America, was theirs, although they were the immigrants. And it didn't say that the people of color were immigrants. It said nothing about the free so-called Negroes. No one called them immigrants. So it's obviously, it was their home. They had lived in Manhattan probably for thousands of years. Because at one time, Manhattan was a major Native American post, just so you know, a trading post. So here it is, the immigrants came into their land, the Native American Aboriginal people, copper color, came into their land, and it early on intermixed with them, and then later on turned on them. And they turned on them for one reason and one reason only: bigotry. That's what again means when you start looking at America, especially in terms of if we're going to call the past great. Because when you start saying great again, obviously you're talking about something that's already happened and you want to return back to that. Now I say this, and this is not to pick on, on the Irish, because again, this is history. You are the children of those people if you're Irish, no question about that. You're their great-grandchildren. Those were your ancestors who attacked innocent people for no other reason outside of the President of the United States making the decision. I'm sure President Lincoln didn't go talk to the blacks in Manhattan and say, hey, would you like for me to declare a draft and start drafting all the white immigrants here and that can't afford to pay $300 to be able to avoid the draft, so that they can fight on your behalf. I'm sure the blacks in Manhattan, New York, had no decision whatsoever in that fight, but ultimately had to deal with the consequences of that decision. And when you think about burning an orphanage down to the ground, a children's orphanage, what kind of heart could those Irish ancestors have inside of them? What kind of genetic makeup could they have inside of them where they would kill children who had nothing to do with a government decision? in this instance, the President of the United States, making decisions with no regard of how it was going to affect poor people or people of color. Not much different than the way things are today, are they? But I share this fact of history with you because I want you to be informed. I want you to know the truth. As the old saying, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Now, free from what? Ignorance. Maybe even from bigotry. But I guess at the end of the day, that's your decision to make. But just because you deny the truth does not deny the truth. And this is truth coming to you today from me, DFG. So you can find this information, Wikipedia, any history book, or you can even watch the movie Gangs of New York, because a lot of that movie is based on the truth. But, it just goes to show you, if the heart is wicked, and what's the heart? The way a person thinks. There is a saying that whatever a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And I will tell you that if the fathers can be wicked, the sons of the sons of the sons can be wicked as well. And when you're silent and when you're quiet and you don't take a stand for what's right, then you're complicit, even if it's by past generation association. Guilt in that regard. There you have it. Again, DFG, Gideon's Flight. Appreciate your time. Hope you learned a little something. More importantly, I hope you teach this to your children, that what hatred and the results of hatred can cause. Like the Civil War, millions of lives and collateral damage. And then as it relates to decisions made by your government, how it could affect the poor, the helpless, the defenseless, and how ultimately they always become the greatest victims in any type of crisis, in any environment. Okay? Thank you. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Talk to you tomorrow, guys. Oh, if you like the video, thumbs up. If you don't, thumbs down. Subscribe. And don't be a child. Learn and listen. All right? That's what intelligent people do. They don't run from information. They embrace it. Bye now.